I saw movement, Skipper said as they looked out onto the ice. A seal? Colton asked as hot breath misted from his mouth. Not a seal, human, Skipper replied coldly. For as long as Colton had known the old man, he had always called him Skipper. He was a heavy-set man, his forehead full of deep cracks and his skin blackened from years at sea and the Alaskan sun. His arms and chest were thick with hair like a bear's fur, and he always wore a captain's cap with a thick white beard. He had heard he had been a fisherman all his life, and it was true enough they had met in a sailor's bar, but Colton had never seen him on a boat, and the old man rarely talked about his life before they had met. Nobody could be out there, Colton replied. It's colder than hell. It must have been a seal or trick of the light off the ice. I know what I saw, boy, Skipper said with ice-cold certainty. There's someone out there on the ice. They were hunting for caribou, elk, and muskox northwest of Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, when they reached the northern tip. The land was as cold and hard as Colton had ever known, and the ice had run thicker and farther south than either had seen. Winter had come early, and the sea had frozen for as far as the eye could see. For days they had been on the trail of a herd of caribou heading west and then northwest. On the fifth day, they had seen the flash of horns and brown hide, heard a long bellow in the cold air, but had never gotten close enough to make a kill. Colton stared out at the bleakness. He saw nothing but the jagged edges of ice jutting upwards out of the water and the falling snow. He reassured himself. The old man saw nothing but the game his mind played on him. The cold and ice were like that. At night forests became living shadows haunting men, and eyes saw things that were never there. A hunter could lose his mind through fear. It was said there were more tales of strange things in Alaska than any other place in the world. And it wasn't all tall tales told around campfires. Colton had witnessed them for himself. Once, as a child with his father, they had been out hunting in the forest and had seen bizarre lights in the sky. Odd orange lights that hung motionless. Even his father had been unable to explain them away. Colton looked out. It wasn't hard to tell where the land ended and the sea began, except now it was covered with a thick layer of ice. Skipper stood motionless, but his eyes flicked left to right, then left, as if he was reading a book. It'll be night soon, Colton said. We should make camp while there is still light. He rubbed his hands together. Even in leather gloves, it felt like the cold had teeth biting his fingers through the thick caribou hide. He was a tall, lanky man, as skinny as a greyhound, with hardly enough fat for the summer months, let alone the frozen winters of the north. But the years growing up in Alaska had toughened him against the cold. His father told him on many occasions, if a man spends enough time in Alaska, his blood will become as cold as the land itself, and then he won't feel the cold. Colton was 24 and still he felt the cold. Often he wondered how much time his father meant. A bitter wind blew from the north, cutting at his eyes like shards of glass and bringing them to tears. They had left Dead Horse 9 days ago, with a light snow fluttering around them in high spirits, but each day afterwards the sky had grown darker, the weather colder, and snows harder. After a week, their boots sunk like rocks in a pool, and it had only got worse the farther north they went. There's a storm coming from the north, Skipper said, looking to the brooding black sky. Dark low clouds hung over them. A big one. It was the last thing either of them wanted. Alaska was different from any other place on Earth. A storm could blow in hours from the Arctic and last for days, and they were a week's ride from the nearest community. Heavier snow began to fall around them. We should move away from the sea to those trees, Colton said. They'll give us some shelter from the wind and stop the tent blowing over. And the horses hate the wind. A few hundred feet away, there was a spinney of high trees and briar behind them. The snow clung to their boots, and Colton could hear Skipper's breathing coming hard behind him as they pulled their horses. I hate making camp in the snow, Skipper said. The cold can freeze the marrow in your bones. Tomorrow, we turn back for Dead Horse. He would get no argument from Colton. When they left Dead Horse, he had expected to be out a few days at most, but they had hunted for a week, without a kill, and both were determined not to come back empty-handed. A caribou or elk would be enough meat to feed them till the next spring. They tied their horses to a fallen oak close by their tent and set about making camp. 4 days ago they had caught fish in an icy stream and cooked them over an open fire, but now they ate beans out of a tin. In the ice and snow that covered the ground, the little flame of the burner was fine at warming a pot, but that was all it was good for. With heavy snow on the ground, there was no way of lighting a fire. The night would be cold enough to freeze a man's heart solid in his body if he didn't have the right clothing. Colton pulled his hood over his head, and a thick mist ghosted in front of him from his mouth. Skipper hadn't spoken since they put up the tent and stood looking out into the darkness to where the sea was. He had taken his rifle from his horse and held it outright as if he was stalking game. In the time Colton had known him, he had never seen the old man troubled. Once when out fishing for salmon, a hook had split right through Skipper's thumb, straight between the joint, and the old man had instructed Colton to cut off the barb before he pulled it out. He had not shown any pain or fear then, and as Colton cut the hook, the old man had said it wasn't the first time a hook had gone through him. He tore off a strip of his shirt and wrapped the thumb in a tight bandage. For 3 days, Colton watched the wound bleed, daring not to ask the old man about it. When they arrived back at Dead Horse, Colton told him he should see a doctor, but the old man simply slunk off to his cabin. "There's nothing out there," Colton said, stirring the beans and looking up at him. "Maybe a few bears, an elk or moose, but that's all." "A woman, half naked," Skipper replied, his voice raised with a hint of anger. "That's what I saw." "A half-naked woman, the color of skin." "Half naked," Colton scoffed. The flame of the burner cast shadows around them. "Half naked," Skipper repeated firmly. "Only a fool wouldn't be able to understand me." He had no idea what had happened to his friend. Maybe the old man was going blind, or perhaps mad, but he didn't take kindly to being called a fool. "In this weather," Colton said. Snow had settled on the hood and shoulders of his jacket, and it was already well below freezing. If there was someone out there, they're dead already. Colton knew Alaska. He had heard the stories of people running out of gas in winter and freezing to death in their cars, and the stories were not as uncommon as one would like. "I know what I saw, boy," Skipper said. "I spent 40 years on the ocean. I know the tricks the mind can play on one. Seen people call dolphins sharks, seen sailors swear they've seen sea monsters, ships attacked by the Kraken. I know what I saw, boy." The conversation was beginning to unnerve Colton. "What color skin?" Skipper looked away from the ocean to him. In the flicker of the flames, Colton could see his face as bleak and odd as the night around them. "What?" "Skin," Colton said as coldly. "You said you saw skin." "What color?" Skipper looked up and pointed to the sky. It was too much for Colton. He couldn't hold his tongue anymore. "Black." A half-naked black woman walking around on the frozen ice. The old man did not rise to the comment. After years of working on the boats, the sun had blackened his skin. In the fading light, he looked as black as the woman he described. "I saw bone as well," Skipper added, "on the cheek." His left index finger prodded his right cheek just below the eye. Colton was confused. "Bone." "Bone, like the flesh had been stripped from it." Skipper's voice was as sharp as a knife. "White." Skipper stared at him unflinching. "Black," he replied. A sudden chill shot down Colton's back. As long as he had known Skipper, the old man had never told tall tales, but he saw something out on the ice, and it unnerved him. "A ring seal," Colton said. "They are black with white spots like a piebald horse. The natives hunt them for food. They live on the ice, and they can move faster than you think, especially if they see a human. It can trick a man's eyes." Skipper lifted his rifle an inch. It wasn't a seal. This thing was walking on 2 legs. "Thing," Colton said. "You said you saw a woman, now you call it a thing." Skipper seemed to have had enough of the conversation. He wouldn't answer any more questions. We take turns on watch tonight, and then we ride for Dead Horse as fast as we can tomorrow. A night on the snow or standing watch for some imaginary woman wasn't much of a difference to Colton and Skipper's. Fear had raised his hackles. Colton ate the beans, but Skipper had none. After he lay down inside his tent on a thick blanket and closed his eyes, his rifle beside him. Snow had fallen on the tent, and the sides had sunken in under the weight like the cheeks of an old person's face. Despite the fact he thought the old man was mistaken, he would keep his .44 loaded and within arm's reach. Alaska had its fair share of bears, and in winter they would attack a human if they smelt food. More than once, Colton had fired his rifle in the air to ward off a hungry polar bear. Outside, the wind howled as if they were in a cave, and Colton could hear the creak as the trees swayed back and forth. He thought he wouldn't be able to sleep, but when his eyes opened, a beam of light forced them shut again, and Skipper was there shaking him. "It's one," he said. "You take watch." He handed Colton a long metal flashlight. "Don't waste the batteries by keeping it on all night." Skipper had taken the first 6 hours, and now he must take the rest of the night. Sleepily, he rose from his bed, rubbed his tired eyes, and crawled out into the cold night air. "Don't fall asleep." Skipper's forefinger prodded him in the chest like a hammer. Not likely in this cold, thought Colton. The night was devoid of all light. Thick clouds hung low overhead, and snow was still falling, heavier now. Colton sheltered under a huge evergreen tree and beamed the flashlight around. A few feet away, he could hear the horses breathing. Normally, they would tie them up away from the camp in case they broke loose at night and trampled over the tent, but Skipper had wanted them kept close. He never said why, but Colton knew all the same. If something happened to the horses, they would be stranded out in the wilderness without food or a means of travel. Colton had spent many a night camped in the woods, but never had he faced such a strangeness as he did tonight. The flashlight was hardly powerful enough to light up anything over a few feet away, and his eyes only saw shadows melting into each other. Around him, the wind seemed to blow and swirl from every compass point. It was hard to tell where any sound came from. Even the snorting of the horses sounded like they could have been a foot or 100 feet away. In the hours he had been asleep, a heavy snow had fallen, and his legs sunk into it as if it was quicksand. An hour standing in it, and snow would run down his trouser leg, melt, and his socks would be wet through, then the cold would bite, and finally frostbite. But all of that was not the thing that raised his blood. The horses. Something had them on edge. Their nostrils flared and their heads flicked around uneasy, as if they smelt a bear or pack of wolves close by. They backed into the wind and pointed their ears forward. Colton pulled his hood from his head and ran frozen fingers through his husk of a beard. His rifle was heavy and the wooden stock cold, so he leaned it against the trunk of a tree. If only there were no clouds, bright stars, and a full moon, he thought, then at least he would be able to see something. A whinny from the horses and Colton spun. Then a gust of wind blew a smell that reminded him of rotting flesh, and he heard the sound of breaking branches underfoot. Something was out there, he had no doubt about it. He didn't need eyes to see it. When he shone the flashlight, it was in jerky motions, as if he was drunk and stumbling about. A shadow appeared beside him, and he heard a rifle bolt cock. Skipper hunted with an old bolt-action rifle. Often Colton could smell the oil on the wooden stock. "Do you smell that, boy?" Skipper said. "Smells like death." He was glad the old man was beside him. "I smell it," he said. "Nothing but a rotting animal carcass," he reassured the old man. Still, he found himself reaching for his own gun. The barrel was colder than ice, and he hoped the bullets would fire if he needed them to. "You can't believe that," Skipper spat back. "The wind has been blowing from the north all night. We would have smelt it hours ago. You hear the horses, boy, they smell it as well." Whinnying and hooves thumped the ground somewhere behind them. A strange sound came out of the darkness. "What's that?" Colton whispered loudly. His hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. He raised his rifle a few inches and gripped it tightly. Teeth, Skipper replied. What? Its teeth grinding together. Colton swung the flashlight, and a beam of yellow light cut through the darkness. They could see nothing. Colton had no idea what Skipper's words meant. Turn the light off, Skipper said loudly. His voice was a muddle of anger and fear. I'd rather see what's coming, Colton said, searching the trees with the flashlight, and anything out there can see us. The old man took a half step backwards. There's nothing out there, Colton screamed back. He wanted so much to believe his own words, but inside he could sense the darkness held a perilous secret. And if there is, he added, I'll put a bullet in it. Colton always hunted with a lever-action Winchester. The sound of chambering around gave him the feeling he was the hunter, and whatever was out there was his prey. But a moment later his courage fled, as if the cold had sucked it out, and he found himself shaking. It grew louder and the smell stronger. It sounded as if the trees themselves had teeth, and every one of them was chattering. A gust of wind blew some leaves above them, and drifts of snow hit Colton's face. The biting cold forced his eyes shut, and he furiously wiped the snow from his face. There, Skipper's scream was filled with terror. They could see it now. A shadow as black as death itself lumbered out of the trees before them, no more than a few feet away. Colton shone the flashlight into black eyes, rotting flesh, skinless bone. He screamed as a finger squeezed the trigger. Another round was chambered, and a second shot rang out, and still the creature staggered forward, faster now as a wolf might nearing its kill. He saw both bullets hit a creature's chest, and blood and flesh exploded like a volcano erupting. It was the woman. Colton knew it. She was real. He wanted to flee, but his feet had sunk deep in the snow. Run, he could hear Skipper cry, but it was too late. The woman was lunging at him, and all he could do was raise an arm in defense. The creature fell over him, and they tumbled to the ground in a twisted knot. Colton was screaming now, what he couldn't say, but he could feel teeth tear against the hood of his jacket, and the smell of death had become part of him. As he tried to push the woman off, teeth sunk into his neck, and a warm stream of blood began to trickle out of the wound. His blood, red blood, human blood. The woman's head thumped against his, and he saw the butt of Skipper's rifle as it was lifted high into the air. A second more forceful strike, and the woman's head knocked his again. A third strike, and the woman's head caved in, and bone and brain and blood and flesh splashed over his naked face. Skipper gathered the flashlight and beamed it down. Colton's eyes squinted through blood into the brightness. The old man kicked the woman off him and pulled him roughly to his feet. Colton was shaking worse than if he was standing naked in the snow as he wiped the blood from his face. What the hell is that thing? He screamed. There was a long moment of silence as each just stood there. It's dead, hopefully, Skipper replied finally in a cold, deathly tone. It's dead. The light was shining on its face now. Colton stared down at it, his eyes like an owl. What could have been human once bore little resemblance to the woman it had come from. The skin had flaked or been peeled off in parts, and under it, they could see flesh as black as a starless night. The eyes stared back up at them. The white had turned black, and the pupils blacker still. The teeth were the only thing that wasn't black. In the torchlight, they passed for the color of a storming sky, gray with speckles of black coming through. Colton was spitting giant globs of phlegm onto the snow. Black blood tainted the white. I got its blood in my mouth, Colton shrieked as he let out a deep cough. In my eyes, up my nose. That damn thing bit me. He could feel blood trickling down his neck. While the wound caused him little pain, the thought of being bitten by this creature was far worse than the bite itself. It's got the plague, rabies, or something worse, and now I've got it, he swore. I'm going to die. I'm going to turn into that. He pointed at the creature spitting on it. There was a long moment of silence where only the wind made any sound. Then Colton spoke again. This time he was calmer. It didn't die. I shot it twice with the 44 and it didn't die. He began looking around for his rifle. He found it a few feet away in amongst some branches and picked it off the snow, his face between blood red with rage and fear, and he held it up. You show me an animal or man that can do that. That can take a Winchester 44 bullet to the heart and still live. He kicked the woman in the head with such force her ear broke off. Skipper said nothing. He couldn't take his eyes off the woman. Beside him, Colton knelt, grabbed a handful of snow and stuffed it in his mouth before spitting it out. The blood had a poisonous, rancid taste, and he swore it moved in his mouth of its own volition as if it was alive. Look, Skipper said, pointing with his rifle. Look at its clothing. While Skipper couldn't stop staring at it, Colton scarcely wanted to ever lay eyes on it again. It was naked from the waist down, and only a loosely hanging, raggedy piece of fabric covered its upper body. The flesh was black, and thick purple veins ran like great tributaries of a river all over its body. There's words written on it, Skipper said. I don't care what's written on it, Colton yelled, spitting again hard onto the snow. Is it even human? Skipper ignored the comment and shone the beam onto the words. That's Russian Cyrillic, he said. That's a prison uniform by the looks. This thing came from Russia, came over on the ice. Skipper looked to where the sea was. No human could cross the ice, and certainly not naked, but this thing is not human. Colton cared less about where the creature came from. What disease turns a body black? The Black Plague. I need a doctor before I end up like that. Antibiotics, medical tests. He kicked the corpse again. There seemed little point in worrying about catching whatever disease it had now. I'm riding for dead horse, and he stormed off, trudging heavy steps through the snow into the night. Now, Skipper said, in the middle of the night, after what's happened, you'll never make it. Now, Colton replied without a look back. We can't just leave this thing here, Skipper yelled. His words were hoarse. Someone needs to see this. Someone's got to know what happened here. You won't make it. Your horse will fall in the darkness. Out of the darkness, a voice came low and indignant. You carry it back if you like. That thing is not riding with me. For a moment, Colton's horse came into the torchlight, and then it was gone.